Heat seems to be a more complex record than any of your other albums.
There is a lot more depth in it, and I was lucky enough for this record to have a long time to write it. The good thing, Soul Deep actually gave me about 2 years almost, to write for this record. And the first stuff I wrote was, it was too R&B, too pop R&B. It was too, nice. And by the time we got closer towards recording, we sort of fell upon this thing which was really, really raw. It depended totally on feel. It was a real accident, really. And I guess a lot of it was, inspired by the stuff that inspired us originally, like the Faces, the Stones, early stuff. Because I was looking at like what happened in Britain in the '60s, after the sort of first soul invasion over there, and we sort of stumbled upon this groove thing that happened. And I guess some of it was sort of influenced by the fact that this Chili Peppers record came out, which I thought was a great thing. It was really refreshing for me. It wasn't sort of inspiring as much as refreshing. It showed me that you could do records without drum machines, without click tracks, with not a lot on them, and make it work good. As long as you had a good rhythm section. So that's the sort of tack we took with the whole thing. It was raw. It was basic, really simple, and depended just on a groove more than anything else.
Sweat It Out is a new sound for you. It's a brave choice as a first single.
Sweat It Out was a song that I immediately, I didn't think it was going to be a hit single, but I thought, to release a song like that, first off, would set a tone for the record. It sort of, to me, it was, it showed all the sides of the, what was going to be in the album. It showed, the groove thing that we're talking about. It showed, the looseness, the guitar bass thing. It had a heavy funk, feel to it. Lyrically, it was a lot different to stuff I'd done in the past. That had an environmental message almost. But that's what it is. And I guess one of the things that really drove that home to me was my kids, because they used to come home from school and sort of complain about me driving the Mercedes because it wasn't unleaded, and things like that. So it's, to me, that really pointed out that when a 4 or 5 year old comes back and is aware of it, that's, everybody should be aware of it.
Wheels in Motion, I noticed you wrote with Ross Wilson. It sounds the most like Two Fires of all the songs here.
Wheels in Motion actually was an idea that we were messing with on Two Fires. I remember, we're just jamming in the studio, getting sounds together in Two Fires, and it was something that Jeff and I started, coming up with. And we had it sort of shelved away, waiting to see what we're going to do with it. And I had Ross Wilson come up to write with me. Ross is he's an unusual character, to say the least, but he's incredible. A lot of the time when I write with Ross, it's sort of like going to school. I sit back and watch him. He's one of these guys who's very, very, very good at what he does. He sits there, he thinks about everything he does, and for me, it's a real, it's a learning process. I sit there and watch him, and but I enjoy working with him. And all I did really was take his basic idea and add my approach to it.
Stand Up could be described, for want of a better word, a political song.
I've never been one to preach or anything like that, or be political. This song is about as close as I'll get to a political song. It's the message of the song is to get up, demand your rights, demand what you want. But you can, one person can make a change. If you sit back, nothing's going to happen.
It's a pretty angry track.
Musically, once again, it was that real cross of the heavy dark funk. It was a song that I wrote actually when EJ was in hospital with the burns, and I was sort of fairly angry anyway, because I've been, EJ was suffering a lot in hospital, and I was locked up there with her. And late at night, we'd go to a hotel, and being fairly frustrated, I had a sort of small writing rig set up there, and I'd sit up at night till 4 or 5 in the morning with headphones on, just blasting. It could burst your eardrums.
The next track has a strong groove and a touch of humour. But where did the lyric come from?
Burn Baby Burn was was inspired by a particular friend of mine, but there's also a whole bunch of them who've got to this point in their life where they, they hit sort of 40 and panic, and start searching for their youth again and run off with young girls, It's really, quite ridiculous when you look at it, these, grown men, chasing, young ladies around, And I was trying to be, keep it fairly, light, sense of humor about it because, it was quite close to the bone with some of my friends. And, I didn't want to sort of have them, jumping out the, the window of their apartments or anything. But it's, it's a funny thing. And I was looking at it and, thinking, I wonder if, this is going to happen to me. But I figure I would, had I got all that out of my system when I was about 16, 17 anyway.
You started a writing partnership with Chris Bailey on Two Fires, and I can see you're at it again. What's the attraction?
Something's Got a Hold is, I wrote with Chris Bailey and Jeff. I really like something that Chris has got in his songs. He's got a great slant. He's very cynical, but he's got a great, just the way he looks at the world is terrific. And, I love to write with him anyway, just because of his sense of humor, just to sit around and listen to him. He's very, very dry. And when we write, I guess because we're both, British, particularly Celtic, background, the Celtic background tends to come out a lot. And we, the verses in that particular song, I think were, really, it was very Scottish, I thought, and writing with Jeff, we managed to sort of blend a North American flavor and, with a key change up to choruses and stuff like that. But a lot of the lyric was, was Chris. Just the words for me, that set up the way I was going to deliver it anyway. And he's like one of these guys who sort of, it gets out on the edge and, it's a lonely look at life, and he, but he's always, always ends up positive with it somehow. It's really good.
This next track is pretty wild. A knockdown party tune, Love Thing. The title kind of says it all.
I thought because of the content of the album was so heavy, lyrically, for me anyway, it was, that it would be good to have a song that was completely, frivolous and, lightweight, but still have, still be entertaining, be funny, and, have, and to do that, you have to have a really good groove.
Talking to You is another song that touches on politics. Did the recent election inspire you?
I started writing the song, and I just got back from the States, and I was, seeing all their, rubbish that had gone on at the elections over there, and it was, I started writing, a semi-political lyric about these guys not listening to, the people who vote for them. And I don't know what happened, but somewhere along the line we got to a B section of the verse, and I just turned it into a love song, So it's a funny song. I really like it. We had it sort of just about finished, and we got all these Beatles BV things happening and all that, and we finished it. We cut it in the studio, and I still wasn't convinced. It was sort of there was something missing that didn't gel it, and I asked Ian Moss to come and play on a couple of tracks, and that was the first track he played on it. He set up the whole groove of the song. And I think, if anything, his parts, defined, the funkiness of the tune. And, it gelled really well. Now it's actually one of my favorite tracks, but it's one of those songs where if you don't listen to it at, 10,000 decibels, it doesn't work.
Stone Cold is one of the most outstanding songs on the record and the closest you've come to Chisel. And I noticed your old partner, Don Walker, had a hand in it.
I'd been wanting to write with Don again for this record, just because, I'd heard so many great songs that he'd written. And it finally got to the point where we sort of, we'd got over Chisel enough to sort of get together and have a bash at it. Don Walker was responsible for a lot, if not, nearly all of, the way I sort of developed as a singer. When I joined the band, I was, 17 years old, and he sort of either very sneakily or obviously, and obviously, influenced me as much as he could. And a lot of the stuff when we, the Chisel days, he'd be writing melodies exact, and I didn't even have to change a thing. It was like that was how I was learning to sing. It was like parrot fashion almost, and it made me develop a style, which in turn, then Don just this was a style he liked, and he wrote for it then, I think my contribution to his songwriting was the fact that I lived the life that that he wanted to write songs about, which was Wilder, and and he'd come from a very staid background, and I was going out doing what he sort of thought was the cool thing to do if you're a wild teenager, so I think we really do complement each other a lot, and it was it was great to actually just sing one of his songs again. They're terrific. And and to top that off, we put Mossy on top of it, which really, I think, makes it sound very Chisel-esque. I think I've been really scared of living in the shadow of Cold Chisel for years, and I've finally got to the point now where I realised that every member of Chisel was a key part of that, what developed as a sound, and I just decided that if there's a song there that happens to sound like that, don't avoid it. It's what you do.
Wait For Me is one of those love songs like I'd Die to Be With You Tonight. Very intense and dramatic.
See, this is an unusual thing for me too. I wrote the lyrics for this song first. Normally I just come up with a title and a feel and then write lyrics around that. But I was sitting at home one night watching a BBC series called The World at War, and I remember they had this one episode about World War One, and it was a letter that this woman found from her husband who died in the war, and basically the letter was, I'm going to return. I want to come home to you. Don't forget me. Don't give up on me. And as soon as I seen this little thing, I just turned the telly off quickly and sat down and wrote this set of lyrics, which is probably one of the better set of lyrics I've written. I think Unfortunately, I lost them. We're sitting in the loft with Tony and Jeff again, and we're writing a song. And suddenly it came back to me, and so I sat down and I rewrote the lyrics to suit a feel that we had, a groove that we had up and going. And it was, it's a very intense song. Basically, it's about, if someone, you'll always be there. If someone's, if he keeps you in your heart, like no matter what happens, if you're gone, you die. You're lost, whatever. If someone, if you hold something dear in your heart, it'll always be there, So it's obviously, the way I feel for Jane and all that, I always wanted, to let her know that, I'm going to come back and haunt her. Basically, I'm going to hang around, I'll always want to be with her. And this is the song to me that had the most of the Chili Peppers groove thing happening. Just it was really loose, the bass feel, the raw guitar, and I think it turned out one of the better songs on the record for me.
You've done quite a few ballads on Heat, and this next one in particular is very passionate. Can you tell us a bit about Tears We Cry?
I met a young girl who was dying of a weird strain of leukemia, and her parents rang me and said, can we bring her over and meet you? And they brought her in, and it was really strange. She'd written to me months before, and I didn't connect the two. And she sent a photo, and I put the photo on the wall. And she walked in, and all of a sudden there was this girl standing next to her own photo, and it was completely accidental, because I get photos everywhere, from little kids, and it's nice, but I never put them up. And this one had been up for months on my wall, and sort of I felt really close to this kid. I'm sure that we had some sort of connection somewhere. I don't know what it was. And because she was dying and she was really sweet, and she, and being a parent myself, I was trying to sort of, look at how a parent could deal with that sort of thing, and how a parent would, to me it would be like just be the end of my life. I'd collapse. Actually, when we were cutting it, just the particular day we started cutting that track, her mother rang me and said, Alice is dying. Can you, she wants to say goodbye. So it was that completely messed me up. I fell apart while I was singing it, and so the vocal on the thing has got lots of flat notes and sharp notes, and it was but it was emotional. So that's a very special song to me.
I notice Right By Your Side was written with your wife Jane.
I had a verse and a B section basically, and Jane always really liked the song, and she said, "Oh, let me, I'll finish it off for you." So she ended up, writing half the lyrics for it, which was great. It's a song that, once again, a tribute to Jane, because she inspires me so much.
This next track, A Little Bit of Lovin', is one of the best lyrics you've done, I think, and there's a very personal story behind the song, I believe.
The lyric, is written about a couple of friends of mine, Vince Lovegrove and his son Troy, who are, I've known Vince for a long time, his people probably know him because his wife died of AIDS, that Susie story that he produced, and young Troy was born with AIDS. And Vince was like very much like me, he was he was a singer in the old days in the Valentines with Bon Scott, and he was like completely, over the top lunatic. And when I moved to Sydney, he was like up there and he was just completely nuts, wild. And then when this whole thing happened, he met Susie, got married, found out she had AIDS, and then she passed away, and he's with Troy, who was born with AIDS. And when I see him now, he's sort of every second that he's awake, he's working with Troy, as spending more time with Troy, making the quality time, that because he knows he's limited, unless something drastic happens, he's very limited. And it was just such a great thing to see that a guy who could be completely off the air could pull himself together so much, so desperately, and be such a great, a better person for it.
I'd Rather Be Blind isn't the old blues song that Rod Stewart covered. It's pretty rocky and intense, though.
I'd Rather Be Blind was originally, once again, it was one of the first things I wrote after Two Fires for the next record. And it was another one of those songs that it was written almost like country and western, Creedence-y or something like that. It's another song where I, inspired by Jane. I was trying to even the Creedence thing again, I was trying to make it like a gospel thing where, it's like a, very basic, simple statement. I'd rather, be dead than not to have you about. And, there's no great, so there's no depth in it. It's just, it's a raw, pure emotion, I guess. And it's one I like to sing a lot. And it's a song that, expressing, love. And, you don't do that in a depressed sort of way. Although the title would suggest that, And a few people actually told me I should change the title because there's an old standard, I'd Rather Be Blind. Etta James did it with, I seen her do it with Dr. John, which absolutely killed me. But I just, I didn't want to change it because it summed everything up, so it's such a great, great statement.
The next track has sort of a rock and soul groove to it, almost classic southern rock.
Not the Loving Kind I wrote with a guy from America called Jerry Williams, who's written a lot of stuff, tons of stuff. He's written for like Delbert McClinton and the Fabulous Thunderbirds, Joe Ely, B.B. King, Bonnie Raitt. So all the stuff he wrote was really that southern, loose sort of stuff. He wrote with Diesel on his last record. Actually, I got on him actually. Diesel suggested him, and he was quite a wild bastard actually. He came down and he, locked himself in my studio and just drank my bar, and we wrote. And it has very much that Keith Richards, Honky Tonk Woman vibe about it. And that's what I like that a lot. And it's so open and so sparse. Yeah, very Texan, I think. South of the border, sort of England for me.
You're getting back to your roots on this next track. It sounds a bit like the Faces or the Stones.
Knock Me Down started out basically as a guitar riff that I wrote, just sitting around bored with a guitar. Reminded me of Paint It Black or something like that. It was really it did have a definite Stones vibe to it. So I wanted to keep it angry, lyrically, because it seemed the song had an intense, feel to me, where it was, it was haunting. It was, strange, strange sound, strange chord, chordally. It was reminiscent of the Stones. So lyrically, I was trying to write a song about being, 18 years old and just, considering yourself, invincible, which I think, particularly we fellas tend to do. When you get to 18, you get your first car, and you're allowed to go into hotels. You think you can do anything, you can take on the world, and sometimes you do. Sometimes you come down badly. I was lucky enough. I did it for about 15 years and managed to keep doing it. Get away with it.
Thanks for going through Heat with us, Jimmy. I think it's the best album you've done so far, and I'm sure the fans will agree. So how should we close out?
We'll play you the little acoustic number we did for the album. This is Catch Your Shadow, and I hope that sort of finishes the album nicely for you.